When you think about events in Warhammer, you're usually going to be thinking about, well, war. But you might also think about things like investigations, politics, and crime. However, what you might not think about is piracy. Let's change that. Hi, I'm Chrono the Harlequin, and welcome back to Live from the Black Library, where today I want to talk to you about piracy in Warhammer 40,000. But before we get into it, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video, and to please subscribe if you have not already done so, as it really helps me out. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, what is a pirate? The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS Article 101, defines piracy as, quote, any illegal acts of violence or detention, or any act of depredation, which is the act of attacking or plundering, committed for private ends by the crew of the passengers of a private ship or a private aircraft on the high seas against another ship or aircraft, and any act of voluntary participation in a pirate ship. That, right off the bat, should really tell you a lot about pirates in Warhammer, and furthermore, what makes them so interesting. Because in a galaxy defined entirely by factions and ideologies and grand causes, it's very rare and interesting to find someone who is well and truly in it for themselves. However, as this video will make clear, that is not always the case. You see, back during the golden age of piracy, people became pirates for several reasons. One was to make ends meet. Another was out of desperation when they had nowhere else to go. Others did so purely for revenge reasons, while others did so out of a sense of adventure. Now, the reason I bring this up is because a lot of these are shown in the various pirates across the Warhammer setting in some form or another. The first and most obvious one is Eldar Corsairs, because it's right in the name. A Corsair is a pirate. Now, these guys best embody that aspect of adventure, because they could very easily have comfortable lives back on their craft worlds, you know, following the paths, falling in line, doing all the stuff that will keep them safe. But Eldari are such that they go out of their way to seek adventure. You see, back during the day, a lot of people who were poor or even average had very, very empty and boring lives in Victorian-era Europe. And yeah, I get it. The romantic idea of going out to sea and finding plunder and treasure and all sorts of things is a lot more appealing than simply staying at home until you die of tuberculosis. However, one interesting thing about Corsairs is that what they often do is steal from Imperial merchant ships, meaning they will raid them, hold their cargo hostage, and then simply sell it back to the Imperium because they don't have any use for it. It's literally just them messing around. But they do maintain strong connections to their craft world. And this was actually the case for a lot of real-life pirates, because a fair amount of pirates, especially the earliest ones, were actually sanctioned by their host country. Ones that did this a lot were the Netherlands and France. And funnily enough, the word buccaneer actually comes from the French word boucan, which was the word used for those wooden frames that they would roast meat on, because that's what they would eat, roasted preserved meat. They were used very effectively as raiders for the merchants coming out of the Caribbean and bringing wealth back to Europe, because they allowed the kingdoms to engage in discreet economic warfare while maintaining a level of deniability. However, these guys would eventually turn on the French crown and become straight-up pirates instead of privateers, because they were not being paid enough and were effectively discarded, so thought, hey, might as well keep doing what we're doing just for ourselves. And this brings us to the next pirates on the list, the Drukhari Raiders. Now, when people think of Drukhari, they're usually thinking of slavers, and funnily enough, a lot of early pirates actually did engage in the slave trade, especially after Britain banned it. But one must also remember, Drukhari are not just slavers, they're also consummate pirates. Now, one funny thing I want to note right off the bat is that Drukhari and Eldar Corsairs are the two kinds of pirates that the Imperium is most likely to work with. You see, Eldar Corsairs are easy to work with because, unlike the Byzantine scheming of craftworlders, they're a lot more simple in their motivations. I want some stuff, give me stuff and I'll fight on your side, at least until I decide to abandon you. It's pretty straightforward, and it actually makes them decently consistent allies when dealing with threats in the void. However, Drukhari are often courted by a much different kind of human. You see, Drukhari absolutely fall into that slot of desperation when it comes to piracy. Make no mistake, a lot of them very much enjoy what they do and get a lot of thrill out of it. However, it is much more a matter of survival for them, because piracy is the main way in which they gather slaves, raiding enemy ships, as well as trading for slaves with other humans of a less savory moral character. A good example of this is when a human pirate named Arlen Buke would trade slaves with Drukhari in exchange for a drug called Red Sacrament, which is actually made from distilled human blood. But people like Buke are not the only person who deal with Drukhari pirates. Another example is Duke Severin of the Severin Dominate, who trades for weapons and help from the Drukhari in order to stave off the Imperium to keep his small secessionist human empire in contention with Imperial forces set on retaking it in the Calixis sector. Now, as previously stated, this was a big part of pirate life, the trading of slaves, especially pirates who had been expelled from Spain after it was retaken by the Reconquista. A lot of these pirates were actually Protestants, Muslims, and Jews who had been kicked out of Iberia by the highly Catholic Spanish, and they needed something to do, so trading in slaves illegally was a good way for them to keep themselves solvent and get money to their families back home. Furthermore, it also helped them get revenge on the Spanish by disrupting their shipping and attacking them, oftentimes on behalf of other kingdoms like the Dutch, who made great use of pirates when facing off against the Spanish in order to secure their own commercial empire. A lot of people actually don't realize this, but some of the greatest pirates ever were Jewish. However, they never would have turned to piracy had they not been kicked out of Iberia. They simply had nowhere else to go. And this actually serves as a perfect segue into the main kind of pirate, that being human deserters, usually people who have left the Guard or the Imperial Navy, or are on the run from the Adeptus Arbites. One thing I feel like a lot of people forget is just how big the galaxy is in Warhammer, and that the Imperium does not have eyes everywhere, and even areas that are under its control on the map are actually not under its control at all. You see, especially in the border regions of the galaxy, like near the Fringe, or just anywhere further away from more important planets, there can very often be found pirate outposts on moons, asteroid belts, and even friendly planets. And funnily enough, it is the main duty of the Imperial Navy to deal with these pirates. But again, that is very hard, because the pirates usually have smaller, less heavily armed crafts and have to rely on guerrilla tactics, so that they can ambush merchant fleets or other smaller navy vessels, make off with their loot, and be gone before the navy even shows up. And they will very, very rarely be drawn into open fights. That's why hunting them down is such a big deal, because if they go unchecked, they will just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where a pirate fleet can challenge Imperial rule across an entire sector. Now, one thing that isn't really touched on is how pirates in Warhammer get their ships. Obviously, if you're an Eldar, it's been made for you, probably sung into existence. However, if you're a human, it's a lot less clear, because what are you gonna do? Petition a Forge World to make one for you? Somehow I doubt that would work. So I looked into how pirates would get their ships in real life, and it was usually through two ways. One being boarding an enemy ship and capturing it, which would be really, really hard for a normal human pirate, and the second is through mutiny. So I'm willing to bet that is the main way in which pirates get their ships. You have a bunch of naval personnel and guardsmen mutiny against the crew of the ship, kill anyone who isn't on their side, and then take it and vanish into the void. And from then onward, you can start capturing other ships as you disable them in combat while the other ones flee, or if you get more and more people to mutiny to your side as the time goes on. But why do people mutiny? Well, that's where we get into another reason for human pirates existing. Before I get into that though, I would be remiss if I didn't mention people who get press-ganged into it. You see, if pirates capture you, or more specifically capture the ship you're on and start controlling it, you kind of have to go along with what they say, because they'll just kill you if you don't. Furthermore, if you try and surrender yourself to Imperial authorities, you will have to either escape the pirates while on their ship, good luck doing that, or wait until the ship is captured by the Imperium if it's not just blown to smithereens to begin with, and surrender to Imperial authorities, at which point they're not gonna believe you. If you could just get out of it by saying, wait, I'm not with them, I'm a good guy, but they forced me into it, everyone would use that excuse and no one would ever be punished, which is just like how it was in the real world. Kingdoms had a zero-tolerance policy for anyone caught aboard a pirate ship, no matter what you say. So, if you're in for a penny, might as well go in for a pound. In fact, the greatest pirate who ever lived, Bartholomew Roberts, got his start this way. He was first captured as a sailor, but eventually worked his way up to be in charge of a small pirate fleet that was incredibly successful. And a quote from him literally states, "For I have dipped my hands in muddied waters, and withdrawing them, find 'tis better to be a commander than a common man." Because once your hands are dirty with the stain of piracy, there's no way out, so hey, might as well go full hog with it. But of course, as previously stated, that is not the case for everybody. While some are definitely criminals who are just on the run, a lot of them are actually anti-imperial rebels. You see, facing the Imperium in head-to-head battle if you want to rebel against their rule usually ends very, very badly. Because even if you beat them on a planet, they have no qualms with just destroying it. But if you are in a ship, it's a lot harder for them to do that. So people who want to rebel against the Imperium's rule oftentimes take to piracy as a way to weaken them and hurt them. And that often leads them into contact with Xenos pirates. And I'm not just talking about Ork Freebooterz, but I will get to them later. You see, a lot of pirates are also Xenos, but usually of the minor Xenos races that have no real pull in the galaxy. A great example of this is the Thrall, which are a psi-active race that has its small empire within the Imperium's borders. The Thrall have very interesting ships, and their name does get mentioned here and there in the lore as a consistent problem for the Imperial Navy. However, we really never see them properly in the lore, which is honestly a shame. And while the Imperium does trade with them from time to time, their main thing is piracy. They're effectively a pirate race. This is a trend you can actually see a lot. Minor Xenos races who have no place in the Imperium's galaxy who turn to piracy. And it's not just Xenos, because also Chaos Space Marines do as well. Now, it is stated that it is often easy for pirates to fall to Chaos, especially ones who directly want to harm the Imperium, and those who are just without the spiritual guidance of the Ecclesiarchy. But many Chaos Space Marines become pirates right from the get-go, especially the Night Lords. That is how they get their kicks, it's how they maintain themselves, especially since most of them are not in the Eye of Terror. This is also true for some elements of the Alpha Legion. However, Alpha Legion piracy is often undercut by whatever large scheme they have going on at the time. One big advantage, though, that Trader Marine pirates have over other pirates is the fact that they are a lot more capable and a lot more intimidating. You see, they'll either have Horus Heresy era vessels, which are significantly better than the ones the Imperium currently has, or will be more capable of stealing proper vessels via boarding actions, because that is what they're trained for and what they do have the equipment for. Furthermore, it is easier for them to get in touch with and take control of traitorous heretical forge worlds. This is something that will give them a degree of procurement abilities. However, it should also be noted, raiding is very important for them in order to secure supplies for their continued military operations. And furthermore, a lot more of what these guys do is going to be dedicated to bringing down the Imperium. A great example being Huron Blackheart, the master of the Maelstrom, who, after the Badab War had failed, turned to effectively being a pirate lord based out of the Maelstrom, which is a smaller warp storm, kind of like a mini Eye of Terror on the other side of the galaxy. What he does is basically piracy, except he is a lot more militarized about it and is capable of actually taking territory. He's like a pirate who more or less graduated. Both he and an Alpha Legion pirate leader named Quetzalcoatlach, who is now deceased, had Xenos in their forces, because, again, pirates attract Xenos. That is not something a Chaos Space Marine leader would ever do. They never have Xenos in their warbands, except for in some very, very rare instances, like with Iskandar Kaon and his Drukhari Scourge girlfriend. This is a big part of what separates pirates in Warhammer from just, say, rebels or enemy dissidents or traitor marines. This flexibility, this looseness of rules. They don't care as much about honor or worshipping chaos or any of that. They're doing whatever it is they have to do. They're totally in it for themselves. Another really good example of this that I've stumbled across in the lore comes from the book Dante by Guy Haley. In it, an Eldari Corsair prince by the name of Hellaineth, dubbed the Pirate King, takes control of a planet named Mas, and dubs it as a free world, where people of all races can live in harmony so long as they're chill and can get along. And this world serves as sort of a haven and way station for pirates, specifically those under Hellaineth's control that are generally good-natured. You know, not vicious chaos marauders, but sort of, swashbucklers and raiders, because they prey on Imperial shipping in order to fund their operations. It's really the only way to survive in the galaxy if you're not part of the Imperium, stealing from them. So, Hellaineth gets confronted by the Blood Angels, led by Dante, who is at this time a sergeant. And what makes this so interesting is that while yes, Prince Hellaineth was at the top, it's not like the Eldari were ruling over everyone who is basically under their suzerainty. In fact, people really were living as equals, and the majority of the people on this planet were Eldar and humans living side by side, working as pirates. And while we don't really see how this was working in practice because our only view of this is from the perspective of the Blood Angels who are already engaged in wiping them out, we do hear from Prince Hellaineth himself when he talks to Dante. The passage goes like this: Xenos, you have enslaved the human populace of this world and used it as a base to commit gross crimes against the Imperium of Man. Do you have anything to say for yourself before I kill you? I enslaved nobody. All were freeborn here. My people were free of the path of my kind, your people liberated from their soul-sucking emperor. I doubt you can understand the concept of freedom, though, no more than a sword of dull iron could. You're a tool. Tools are not free. What a pity. You destroy that which you cannot understand. Very well, said Dante, not interested in the least in the Eldar's words. Squad! Hellaineth stood, his face darkening. You think you can kill me? Your arrogance almost matches that of the Eldar. They could not contain my ambition. You will fare no better. This world was a haven. Look at how many kinds of creatures lived here in harmony. Do you not think before you destroy? They were all thieves, said Dante. And why should they not be? The galaxy gave them nothing. The Eldar smiled wickedly. It is the duty of the weak to take from the strong, so they themselves may be strong. The strong dislike to be dispossessed. So, it is good to make people see things from the other side. Life is too precious to experience from one standpoint alone. He looked at Squad Dante. Though I suppose my philosophy falls on deaf ears here. You engineered creatures are never particularly flexible of thought. The attitudes on display here from Hellaineth are so interesting to me. He is a giant middle finger to every kind of authority in the galaxy. The Eldar couldn't contain his ambition, and all of his Eldari pirates rejected the paths, and he freed humans from the Emperor. Well, quote-unquote, you can argue how long that would have lasted given how chaos is, but he did do it for a while. This guy held control of this planet for 50 years. Now, I know in the lifespan of the galaxy, and in the lifespan of an Eldar even, that doesn't seem like a long time. But one thing you should note is that pirates do not live very long. We hear about pirates and assume they spent years and years terrorizing the high seas, but that's really never the case. Bartholomew Roberts, who I mentioned earlier and who was effectively the most successful pirate ever, only was active for 3 years before he was killed in battle, and Blackbeard was only active for 15 months. The ones who lasted the longest usually were privateers who could just retire when their job was done. But true honest-to-God pirates like Hellaineth don't last very long. One thing that should be noted though is that Hellaineth doesn't die. He actually manages to give Dante and his squad the slip, even though all of his followers are wiped out. Funnily enough, Dante actually kind of calls him out, stating, all your followers are destroyed, but you're just here bantering with me on your throne? You really don't seem to care. This is all just a game to you. And then he's like, well, yeah, I guess it kinda is. Because despite how rebellious and anti-egalitarian he seems, yeah, he really is just doing this for freedom and to have fun. Prince Hellaineth the Pirate King really is one of the few rare examples of a character in Warhammer who is effectively just screwing around to have fun. But of course he is not the only one, because this vibe of people who turn to piracy simply because they don't want to play by the rules of their species also applies to another group. That being Ork Freebooterz, who I previously mentioned. You see, Ork Freebooterz don't really fit in with other orcs all that much because they're not as concerned with fighting, and are more obsessed with gathering loot, more so than even a lot of flash gits. And for this reason, they're some of the cruelest and most brutal orcs because they will do whatever it takes to get their hands on loot. Doesn't matter who they have to kick around, doesn't matter who they have to betray. But it also means these are the orcs that Imperials will ally with in the event that they do have to ally with the Xenos out of pure desperation, because they can be bought. They can be relied on to do something if they know they're going to get money out of it. Sure, whatever you give them is going to be turned against you later on, but if you have a short-term problem and need it taken care of by someone big and stupid, yeah, freebooters are good for that. They're also probably without a doubt the most successful pirates, operating the largest fleets with the most weapons, and who are the most capable of going head-to-head with the Imperial Navy instead of just relying on hit-and-run tactics. Personally, for me, these guys are my favorite kind of orc, because I love how piratey they are, I love how fun they are with their Jolly Roger logo, or Jolly Orc as it's called for them, and I love their appearances in the Battlefleet Gothic games, where they're just a lot of fun as you would expect. Also, these guys are very big fans of ramming because in Warhammer, you're never escaping melee. And before I move on here, there is actually one interesting thing I would like to bring up. There is an instance of the Grey Knights teaming up with the Harlequins, yes, the Eldari Harlequins, to attack a bunch of Chaos Space Marines who were operating as pirates out of an asteroid belt station. In one of my earliest videos, the Grey Knights Eldar Bromance, I mentioned that instance. It's a tiny little lore tidbit, but I just found it to be really cool. So, up until this point, all of the pirates I've been talking about are explicitly anti-imperial or quote-unquote bad guys, but that's not always the case. there are some rare instances of pirates or pirate-like individuals working on the side of the Imperium or on the side of humanity, quote unquote. The first instance is rogue traders. Now, rogue traders are known as, generally speaking, merchants and explorers, but they are certainly not above these piratical raiding actions, but under the sanction of the Imperium. You see, when someone became a privateer for a kingdom, they were given something called a letter of marque, which was basically their permit to do piracy, and if they did not have that letter of marque on them, it meant death for them. So a rogue trader's warrant of trade gives them similar leeway to a letter of marque. They can raid, attack, rob, and all sorts of things, oftentimes clashing with Xenos and even humans who are outside of Imperial law, at their leisure and have permission to do so. Furthermore, narratively speaking, they occupy that wild, carefree, freebooting kind of nature, that real adventurous spirit you don't see much in Warhammer. Now, to end off this video, I want to talk about one very rare one-off instance, that being the story of Borz One-Eye, a fallen angel who was a pirate. You see, after Borz One-Eye would emerge from the warp after the fall of Caliban, he would see the galaxy for what it was, and over the course of several decades or even centuries, set himself and a few other Fallen up as pirates. A bunch of Fallen had a moon-based station, but Borz was their go-to pirate guy. His big thing was raiding out of desperation and a need for supplies, but he also raided Imperial vessels because he simply didn't care about them. He hated what the Imperium had become and had no qualms with knocking them around for his own gain and for the protection and survival of his brothers. However, he was not fully disloyal or traitorous, because he said that we make a point whenever we see Chaos vessels, we engage with them and attack them, because we have no tolerance for them. And that's the reason that when Lionel Johnson found him operating as a pirate, he was willing to let him back into the fold and take him on as one of his risen and redeemed angels, because he never turned to Chaos or truly turned against humanity. He was not loyal to the Imperium, but in a way he was still loyal to humanity, and I think that's really what matters and what sets him apart from other pirates you see. This is coupled with his honestly pretty cool and chill personality. He really does seem like someone who would be a cartoon pirate, because he's friendly, he's cool, he's a great leader, and he does seem to just love adventure and hanging out with his brother Marines. Honestly, I think a book from his perspective about his time as a pirate would be incredibly interesting. Characters like Borz and the Freebooters and others show, I think, really well why pirates are so fun in 40k. They are very unique compared to the other factions in the setting without fully derailing it. They still seem believable and logical. You can see a pirate doing their thing in Warhammer and think, yeah, I can see that, that makes sense. In fact, if you like pirates and like what I've told you, I would highly recommend to you the Blackstone Fortress books by Darius Hinks, which follow the rogue trader Janis Drake, who absolutely does have that pirate air to him, exploring, doing what he needs to do, and meeting all kinds of cool people. Even the short stories in the Blackstone setting honestly have things like a guardsman defector teaming up with an Eldari outcast in order to stop a bioweapon from destroying a space station that has been built around a Blackstone Fortress. You see, they built a station around a Blackstone Fortress in order for people to better explore its depths for all the treasures and goodies in there, and is a free meeting place for people of all races and species and allegiances to meet up. There are Imperial preachers there spreading the Imperial creed to the far-off places. There's smugglers and bandits and all kinds of people. I know I'm saying that a lot, but it's just really, really good, and I highly recommend you read the Blackstone Fortress books and short stories. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think pirates are a great addition to Warhammer, or do they take away from the large, sweeping scale that it's supposed to have? Should there be more focus on the larger battles and the great campaigns, or do you think the presence of pirates adds to the depth of the galaxy, making it feel more alive and full? Furthermore, do you want to see more of certain Xenos pirates like the Thrall, or do you think they're maybe left to the backbenches and that adding too many Xenos and things would just muddy the waters of the setting? As always, I would love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and until then, I will see you in the next video.